Okay, then far away.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another lockdown lecture, or should I just call it a Zoom event with Harif. Harif, for those who don't know us, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and we've been running these Zooms since the beginning of the pandemic, and we thought it was just such a good idea. We're still continuing to do so. We have a global audience. We have some wonderful people who come every time, and we've got a sort of family, if you like, now, and we've also got newcomers who are joining us. So welcome to all of you. We have a website, which is www.harif.org. And there you can find all our past recordings of all our Harif events. Please do go to the website in order to subscribe and receive login details for our Zooms. We also have a sister website called Point of No Return, which is a blog. Just click on news on the Harif website. This session is being recorded and is being live streamed to the Harif Facebook page. We hope the recording will be up within a few hours, if I can get my act together. And it'll be there for future reference. What else did I want to say? Can't remember now. Oh yeah, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for our guests. I've got lots of questions too, so if you'll bear with me, please do type your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to ask our guest your questions. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Hen Mazzig. Actually, I'm welcoming him back because he's already been on a Harif lockdown lecture. That was back in July 2020. And since then, he has written a book, and he's here to talk about it tonight. So Hen Mazzig is an award-winning Israeli author. He's a writer, he's a speaker. He was named as one of the Allgemeiner's top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life in 2018 and 2021. The Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting chose Hen to be its Portrait in Courage Award laureate. And he is a prominent digital influencer with over 100 million users. 100 million users have interacted with his content, while his Instagram has a higher engagement rate than Kim Kardashian, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Nike. And he's authored numerous viral campaigns, and he's inspired others to speak out about all sorts of things. I think we will discuss some of them. And in 2019, he co-founded the Tel Aviv Institute. And actually, I will let Hen explain what the Tel Aviv Institute does. Of course, his book, The Wrong Kind of Jew, came out a few months ago in 2022, and we are here to talk about it. So, Hen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure.
It's an honor and a pleasure, and I love joining you. And as you know, Lynn, I'm a big fan of everything you do, the work of Harif, of your book that has been such an inspiration to me while I was writing my book. So yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. So as I said, I've got a few questions for you. And the first question is the obvious one. Why did you write your book?
Why did I write my book? And I'll add to it, why did you write your book in English and not in Hebrew? because I think that's another interesting
By the
point.
way, this is it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. So I wrote my book because I think I thought for a long time I've been, taking a step back. All of my life, I knew that I was Mizrahi, and I knew that I was Mizrahi Sephardi. That part of my identity is that my family came from the Middle East and North Africa. That my mom came from Iraq, my dad came from Tunisia. They were speaking Judeo-Arabic. It was the food that they were cooking and still cooking is Middle Eastern one. My identity was entrenched in the Middle East. And as I moved to New York, and then later on, I moved to Seattle. I lived in Seattle for a few years. After my military service, I served for 5 years as a humanitarian officer in the Israeli army. And then later on, I moved back to Tel Aviv, moved to London. And throughout this time, I was writing articles, speaking, writing, making posts on social media, sharing my story. And I felt like every time I wanted to look deep into my roots and my family's heritage, there weren't many books available out there. I mean, yours came out when I was already writing my book, but I was looking for resources, and there weren't many resources about Mizrahi Sephardi Jewish identity, about our history, about the roots of our community. And besides that, there was not even a personal. I mean, the one of the most glaring issue was that there wasn't any personal story, any manifesto. That's why I called the book Mizrahi Manifesto, because I felt like there were many people like me when I was traveling the world, speaking on campuses, speaking to Jewish communities. I found that a lot of young Mizrahi Jews, Sephardi Jews, were struggling with their identity. When we're looking on any representation of Jews in Hollywood, there isn't much, and most of it is not positive, I would say. But most of the representation that we're getting is Ashkenazi representation. It's gefilte fish, it's bagels and lox. And I write in my book that my grandparents don't look or sound like Larry Davis or Sarah Silverman. And whenever we're speaking about Jewish identity, there's it's always centered around Ashkenazi identity. And I felt like there was a need to explore and discuss my identity, because I didn't grow up eating bagels and lox. I didn't grow up speaking Yiddish. Many of the Ashkenazi traditions are foreign to me. Of course, we're all Jews. We all have this common heritage and common culture. We all came from Israel. That's where we started. But my family had a different experience. And the reason that I wrote this book in English as well is because I didn't have the language to do it in Hebrew. The terms like Jew of color or person of color, or terms like even the Mizrahi term itself of being Mizrahi is so different in its meaning and connotation in Hebrew than it is in English. I felt like in English I had a way, there were tools available to explore my identity in how it manifests itself in a Christian countries, in a Western country. The whole conversation around critical race theory and where do Jews fit into this, into racial hierarchies, and can have a whole conversation about that. I'm sure we're not going to get into it, but all of this was yeah, a little bit, but all of this was much easier to do in English than it was in Hebrew. And I also don't think that in Hebrew or in Israel, the Israeli audience is ready to really discuss the sins of the past, of the creation of Israel, and the mistakes that we've made that are still silenced in Israel. And I think that's a big issue that we have to solve and work for in Israel. But I don't think the Israeli public is ready for that.
Right. So since the book is in English, obviously your target market is an English-speaking audience. I mean, do you see people in America predominantly buying it? Or...
Yeah, definitely American audience and in the UK as well, British audience. Those are the two main markets that the book is. And in Canada, of course, in Australia. Those are the main markets.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it will be translated into Hebrew for an Israeli audience eventually?
Maybe one day. I think that, as I said, the Israeli public is still struggling with the issue of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews and their place in society. And there's a lot of things that we need to work on that I discussed in the book. You know, there's the whole conversation around the Supreme Court in Israel today, and the reform that the Likud is offering, Netanyahu is offering, or pushing forward, which I personally oppose, because I don't think that the government should have more power with than the Supreme Court. But one thing that is very important to discuss is the fact that there was no Mizrahi representation in the Supreme Court. There was one seat of Mizrahi representation. When you speak to the Ashkenazi judges in Israel, they say that they just didn't find someone that was made from the right material, which is horrific, you know, this way to describe Jews that are not Ashkenazi, basically. Or if you look at the academia, in Israeli academia, only 7% of the lecturers are Mizrahim. We are 55% of Israeli Jews. How come we are so underrepresented while we are the majority? There was never head of Olympic committee in Israel that was Mizrahi. There was never a head of any university in Israel that was Mizrahi. You never had any head of theater in Israel that was Mizrahi. All of this it's heartbreaking, but it's also telling you of the place that Israel is at. And those, I know people often would just dismiss statistics, but when the majority in a country does not get any representation, I think it's a real issue of where the power dynamic is.
Yeah. So yeah, I think everybody admits that the media and academia, you know, are the strongholds of Ashkenazim. But you could argue that popular culture is now very Mizrahi, and perhaps the Mizrahim have won the culture wars, you know, certainly in food and music. And I get the impression that the new generation, the young generation, finds it cool to identify with Mizrahi culture. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that the reason that I discussed that in the book, that I use the term Mizrahi and not Sephardi, is because Sephardi just, for me, encapsulates only part of my identity. It's only the religious practices. It's only the piyutim and the way that we're praying. Being Mizrahi Jew means that I'm part of the Edot HaMizrach, the people of the East, that I have this culture, I have the language, we all have the shared experience of being expelled from the Muslim world because of our Jewish identity, because we were never part of the dominated hegemony, and that we struggle with all of this. So I think all of this is why Mizrahi matters to me, and it matters to a lot of young Mizrahim as well in Israel. As you said, the food, the music, the most popular artists in Israel are Mizrahim. The food today, even Ashkenazi Jews are cooking Mizrahi dishes because it's much more popular, and it's the soul of the country. Israel is a Middle Eastern country, and Jews in Israel are Jews in the Middle East, and we should not forget that. I think we often think of Israel as an extension of some Western countries, but it's definitely not. Jews are indigenous Middle Eastern people that have returned to their homeland, and much like the Armenians in Armenia or the Copts in Egypt, we have a long history or an identity that we have preserved. And Mizrahi Jews, I mean, at some point we were all Mizrahim.
Right, that's interesting. We can explore that a bit later. I just want to go back to what you said about we have a common history and we were all expelled from Arab countries. And obviously this is not being taught in Israeli schools. I think there was a poll done and only 14%, I think, of people who were asked said they were taught anything at all about Mizrahi history and heritage.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I remember not learning anything about the history of my family. And even my grandmother never told me about the Farhud or about the horrific things that she's seen. Actually, when the book came out, first of all, she was against me writing the book. They have so much fear and so much trauma that they brought with them, and there was never an outlet for them to discuss the history that they have experienced and the trauma that they had. And this trauma that did not stay in Iraq, the trauma came with them to Israel. And in 1991, my grandmother said that she thought they escaped from the Iraqis. And here Saddam Hussein is launching rockets that are falling in Ramat Gan, where the highest population of Iraqi Jews are in Israel. So they couldn't even escape the Iraqi brutality that they have, that they thought that they were safe from. And then with the first Intifada and the second Intifada, this the terrorism and that is that is promoted by Arab nationalism, the same Arab nationalism that forced my family out of their homes and their land with nothing. And I think all of this is really relating to why they did not discuss it. And then in Israel, there was no real option for them to explore and to. I took my grandmother to the Babylonian Heritage Museum in Or Yehuda, and I think it was one of the first times that I saw her crying when she saw the exhibitions, because she never felt like there was a way for her to deal with what happened to them. And only after when during the writing of the book, I couldn't tell her that I'm writing a book. I only later on I told her, and when it was out, she's still worried. I was there a few months ago and I showed her the book, and she said, I just hope that they won't see it, that the Iraqis won't see it. She still thinks that she has to, even in Israel, that she's not safe from the people that did horrific things to her and her family.
Yes, I actually, that sounds very familiar to me, because relatives of mine who went through trauma, for instance, in Iraq, are still paranoid about saying anything. They use pseudonyms when they go on Facebook or something. So I sympathize with that sentiment. But isn't there also a problem that they try and their memory plays tricks on them, in a sense that they only remember the good and they suppress the bad?
Yeah, absolutely. They often say how great it was to live in Iraq and how great it was in Baghdad and how their neighbors have protected them. I actually wrote in the book that it took me years to get some of the negative stories from my grandmother and the true stories, because I kept saying everything was so amazing and so great. Why did you escape? I mean, you had this massive house, this huge amount of land. Your father worked in the court. It sounded like she was telling me how, their neighbors would bring trays with sweets to their home every Jewish holiday. They had a great relationship with them. And I kept digging into it. And then later on, I realized that first she was telling me how her father was killed by the Iraqis, and we thought originally that he was hanged, and we looked into it deeper and we realized that he wasn't hanged, but he had we don't really know yet, because there's several stories that she's telling, and she's over, we don't even know her age actually, but she's over 93, because when she came to Israel they didn't have passports, so she doesn't even know her real age. But she's telling us stories of how her father was chased by the Iraqis and how they were called Jews in a derogatory way, and that being Jewish meant that you didn't have equal rights and that you were oppressed because you weren't an Arab. Not being an Arab in the Arab world means that you are automatically a second-class citizen.
But when you talk about all this to, say, students on campus in America, do you ever get accused of Islamophobia?
Yes, of Islamophobia and of racism. And I'm thinking, there to accuse Mizrahi Jews of racism and Islamophobia is the most ridiculous idea that you can think of. Of course, Mizrahi Jews can be racist like any other people, and they can hold some Islamophobic ideas. But they were a minority in the Islamic world. They were the ones that were oppressed by the Islamic world. I definitely abhor, and I think it's terrible to have to hold prejudice towards Muslims because they are Muslim, or to Arab people because they're Arabs. But the trauma and the experience that my grandparents and my family hold from the Muslim world is not out of their hatred or their bigotry towards Arab people or Muslim people. It's because they've experienced violence in the worst ways. My grandmother told me how during the Farhud, she saw her best friend, a teenage girl that was disabled, raped in the streets of Baghdad and then shot, not shot, but killed with a glass bottle by a Iraqi police officer, or how she saw a Jewish mother and 9 children being shot in the streets. All of these horrific things that that happened to them because they were not Muslim, by Muslim people and by Arabs. So it's not coming out of bigotry, it's coming out of trauma. And I think when we are able to I feel like every other minority that experienced trauma by other other communities, we in the West, we are able to contain it and discuss it. But when it comes to Jews, it's often we are dismissed in many ways in this regard.
Right. And in your book, you take a swipe at two lots of people mainly. One is very far left Jews who claim to talk about Arab Jews in their work. Perhaps we can name a few names like Ella Shochat or Zvi Ben-Dror Benit, I think his name is. Leo Sternfeld, does that ring a bell? Can you give an example of what you object to in their work?
Sure. First of all, we were never Arabs, and that's very important. I mean, Jews were never considered Arabs in the Middle East. And I challenge Ella Shochat and Aryeh Duvnov and Lior Steinfeld and all of those, Arab nationalists to call any other minority in the Middle East Arabs. Would they call Copts Arab Copts? Would they call Kurds Arab Kurds or Arab Amazigh or Arab Yazidis? Of course they're not. And if they will do it, those minorities will be very angry with them and probably much less polite than I was in the book. But the notion that those two, Duvnov and Streifeld, the two professors that both had or in senior positions in Jewish and Israel Studies department in George Washington University, in very prestigious universities, are promoting this lie, and they are not even Mizrahim. Like they're not. They don't really have. I don't think they spoke to any Mizrahim. But for you to be a non-Mizrahi person, even if you're Jewish, and telling Mizrahi Jews that we should accept this label that we never had, when majority of Mizrahim, majority of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa that live in Israel today, by and large would reject it. I don't think any Mizrahi Jew in Israel would accept the title of Arab Jew, and I'm sure that they would agree with that. So you're de facto forcing and label and an identity on people that reject it and tell you that they're not that. That I think is the worst crime that you can commit against this community. Besides erasing our history, besides all of this, is just to we're already voiceless, and that's something that I'm always struggling with. I feel like I'm the voice of my family. I have 12 aunts and uncle on my mother's side and 16 on my father's side, and none of them speak or write in Hebrew in the way that I do, at least. And I often feel like I have such a burden on my shoulders. And when people just dismiss their experience and telling me that my family should accept some sort of label or identity, it's heartbreaking, but I get very angry. The Arab identity is an imperialist identity that was reserved only for Muslims. Because my family were not Arabs, they lost their passport, they lost their property, they lost everything they had. They came to Israel with nothing other than their identity and their history, and that was the last thing that they have. And Aryeh Duvnov, Ella Shochat, Zvi Ben-Dror Benita, all of those scholars that support Arab nationalism and support the Arab Empire are trying to take the last thing that my family has, and it's beyond heartbreaking. It's upsetting, and everyone should be upset by it.
You also describe your encounter or exchange with somebody called Seth Rogen, who may not be known to British people, actually. Can you explain who he is and what happened when you confronted him about his political views?
Right. I actually spoke to Seth Rogen. He's a very famous comedian in America. He had many movies that were, top of the ranks of movies in America. Very famous comedian with millions of followers and etc. And he always spoke about his Jewish identity as Ashkenazi Jew in the films and in in interviews. And then one day he started tweeting about Israel and Palestine, and saying things like, Jews have nothing to do in Israel. We don't belong in the Middle East. That Jews are, actually his family is from Europe, and all Jews are from Europe, in a sense. And I reached out to him and we started a conversation, and he kept saying, we're just white people killing brown people. And I said, that's not true. First of all, Jews are not white in the sense that we're not benefiting from white privilege in the West in the same way that other white Christians would, even if we're white passing in this sense. But even so, in Israel, majority of Jews are Mizrahi Jews. And I tried to really get him to hear us and see us. And I kept speaking to him, and the only response that I got was him saying, I'm the most famous Jew. I have an experience as a Jewish person. He said I'm the most famous Jew in the world a few times. And he basically dismissed my, yeah, I know. You would think it would be like Maimonides or someone, but no, it's Seth Rogen think he's the most famous Jew in the world. And he kept going without really listening to me, and going on and on about Palestinians, about Arabs, and how, and really not being able to hear me. And it's a reoccurring thing. I saw it with another comedian, maybe that some of you would know, David Baddiel, that wrote a book called Jews Don't Count, which I thoroughly enjoyed until I got to the middle of the book, where he says that that he has nothing to do with Israel, that his Jewish identity is about the same things I said earlier about gefilte fish and bagels and Sarah Silverman. And he called Israeli Jews fake Jews. He says we are too machos, we are too tough and rough, and that he has nothing to do with us. And I thought, that was jarring to read back then. But then he made a movie with the same title of the book that was aired in Channel 4. And I saw the movie, and I was, again, if it wasn't bad enough, I found myself agreeing with Miriam Margolis, which I never thought that I would agree with her. But David Baddiel made me agree with Miriam Margolis, where he was interviewing her, and he says to her, David Baddiel is saying, I'm a European Jew. I have nothing to do with Israel. I find myself being part of Europe. My family is from Europe. My whole experience is European. I have nothing to do with the Middle East. And she actually told him, she said, we are all Jewish. We are one people. And that's why she hates Israel so much. And Israelis, we're not, I didn't agree with that part, but I do agree with the fact, with the peoplehood. And, I reached out to David Baddiel through a few ways, and he didn't want to speak to me. But in his movie, he featured only very powerful and wealthy Ashkenazi Jews that are celebrities. There was not one Mizrahi representation. There were no Jews there was one black Jew for about a minute that he interviewed, but other than him, there wasn't really representation. All he showed in the movie is very rich, assimilated Jews that have been very successful in their career by hiding their Jewish identity, or even if they speak about it, it's in a very assimilated way. And I wrote an article about it saying that it's so, he didn't even feature Orthodox Jews in his movie. This, I feel like it's not just David Baddiel, it's a larger issue, because his book and the movie were accepted by many Ashkenazi Jews, even some Mizrahi Jews that I've seen online praising it. And I think it's terrible. I think the movie itself does such disservice to the Jewish community, because we are trying to say that we are not European, that all Jews come from the Middle East, that we are not swindlers that went to the Middle East and stole someone else's land, that even if we lived in Europe for a few hundred years. As I said, we were all once Mizrahim, we all come from Israel, we pray towards Jerusalem, we have this stewardship connection to the land of Israel. That's what being indigenous is. We have lunar calendar. We can't be considered Europeans or Christians or white. But in his movie, the whole premise was that he's a European Jew, that he has nothing to do with Israel, and that, he doesn't care what people do to Israel or to the Jews over there, because his identity is the only one that matters, and that other Jews don't count. And that was my issue with his movie.
It sounds like a good title for another book, Other Jews Don't Count. But Howard Jacobson actually wrote a very good article in the Jewish Chronicle a couple of weeks ago, I think, attacking David Baddiel, if I remember rightly. And he said that people who are fighting anti-Semitism, have a blind spot about Israel, especially since the current anti-Semitism is in the guise of anti-Zionism. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I don't think that every person that criticizes Israel is an anti-Semite. I have criticism for the country and for the government. Most Israel, I'm sure Netanyahu has criticism to the for the government of Israel in his policies and some of his policies. But you know, I think the issue becomes when people are using medieval tropes about Jews when they speak about Israel. When Israel becomes this, you know, the swindlers, the ones that are stealing from other people, that came to the Middle East with nothing to do with when they have no roots, swindled people out of their land. Again, it's all this, you know, this characteristic of a medieval Jew which has been the anti-Semitic portrayal of Jews. So there's a very easy way to distinguish or to draw the line, and that's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition, which makes it very clear and says you can criticize Israel as you criticize any other country. Once you cross the line and you are opposing Israel's existence, or you criticize Israel in terms that would be anti-Semitic if you were talking about Jews instead of Israel, then we know that this is not legitimate and that your criticism is bigotry.
Absolutely. Why do Jews in Israel vote Likud, vote for Netanyahu against their best interests? Can you explain? Can you explain the phenomenon?
Right, and that's another thing that scholars, Ashkenazi scholars in America would say, that Mizrahi Jews keep voting against their best interests because they clearly are stupid enough to understand what's good for them. And it's just, you know, it's soaked with racism, this sort of phrasing of this issue. Mizrahi Jews don't vote against their best interest. You know, as every places of power in Israel, also the Israeli government, we never had any prime minister that was Mizrahi, not even quarter Mizrahi, in all of the years of Israel's existence, which is an issue and we need to fix. But I think that Mizrahi Jews are looking at the options that they have, and Mizrahi Jews, while they can be very liberal and open, and you know, my family accepts me as a gay man, and my mom cared more about my partner being Jewish than who is my partner, and they can be very liberal and very open on many issues, but they are very nationalistic, but not nationalistic as we see nationalism in the West. Nationalism in Israel is quite different than nationalism in empires. In the UK, nationalism is something that we oppose, or tribalism is something we oppose. The same in America, we're saying that nationalism is a bad thing. But when you are a minority in a country that is 0.03% of the Middle East, when the majority of the people in this country came from the Middle East and North Africa, and as I've said before, carry with them memories of violence and attacks and being stateless, they are going to vote for a party that represents their best interests, which are being nationalistic in the sense of protecting their country, not nationalistic where they're saying no one else should live in the country, because we know there's 2 million Arabs in Israel that are being treated much better than other places. There's still, again, a lot of work to do, but Arabs in Israel are more represented in Israeli academia than Mizrahi Jews. There are more Arab doctors than there are Mizrahi doctors, which is, you know, 55% of Israeli Jews are Mizrahim. Arabs are 20% of the country, and there are more Arab chemists and Arabs in high tech and Arabs in that are doctors, heads of hospital departments, than there are Mizrahim. So all of this to say that they're not against, that it's not coming out of racism or nationalism that is about anyone else. It's nationalism that is about the best interest and protecting their own. And to that comes I discussed that at length in the book, the political history of the left in Israel. The Ashkenazi left in Israel has been very racist to Mizrahim. They hold terrible, I mean, opinions. Many of the politicians have engaged. I mean, even Yair Lapid is the son of Tony Lapid that said some of the worst things that you can imagine about Mizrahi Jews. Something like, that Tulkarem, this Arab city, he said Israel did not occupy Tulkarem, the Arab city, but Tulkarem, the Arab city, has occupied Israel with the Mizrahim. That we basically, our culture has took over the land and made it something else. So I think Mizrahim are seeing that Lapid is handing this opposition or the left, and they feel like they would go with the party that welcomes them. And even if Netanyahu is Ashkenazi, at least he's treating them in a respectful way, and he's seeing them and he speaks about them, which, yeah, I think that's part of why they're voting more to the right.
And yet you do read articles and hear people say, oh, the Mizrahim are the bridge to peace. I mean, do you think this is a load of nonsense? Do you think it's built on an illusion? That they think there's a similar culture, obviously, between Mizrahim and the Arabs, but that isn't the answer, is it?
Right. I'm sorry, but the question is.
Yeah, I mean, people who say that the Mizrahim are the bridge to peace, like a bridge between Ashkenazim and the Arabs.
Right. I mean, I think we can be that, but when you see those delegations that are going to Dubai and Saudi Arabia to all those peace talks, I didn't see many Mizrahim being included in there. All the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are all Ashkenazi Jews that are going to this. So, I mean, maybe we are, but we're not in places of power to actually explore that. But I don't think that, I think that we can be a bridge to peace in the way that the Arab world must recognize the horrors that they did to us. I'm not looking for compensation. I'm not looking for an Iraqi citizenship. I'm good with my Israeli citizenship, and I don't have any plans to visit Iraq anytime soon. But I do want the Arab League. Amazing, the Arab League. When we speak about the Middle East, people always see the Arab world as the weak one and Israel as the strong one. They're called the Arab League because those are Arab countries that come together as an imperial force. And people just are so, they can't see it because they have such preconceived ideas about brown people and what we need to behave like and what we are. But yeah, sorry, I would say that when the Arab world will recognize what they did and the horrors that they've done, and how they, why their countries are in the place that they are, and it's because of what they did to the Jews, and it's because of the ethnic cleansing of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, then I think we can be, then there will be a genuine peace. Peace is not just a piece of paper.
Yeah. It's interesting that in all the talk of the Abraham Accords, that this subject has never come up. That, the fact that these countries have expelled their Jews and or dispossessed them. It's almost like Israel is brushing all this under the carpet because it's more interested in having good relations and trade and, getting political benefits out of it.
Yeah, and I think the most telling part is when Yair Lapid was the prime minister a few months ago, he traveled to Morocco to sign this peace agreement with Morocco and get all these benefits and all these agreements. He didn't say a word about the Jews of Morocco, which we think that Morocco was the best for the Jews, but of course there was also pogroms and violence against Jews in Morocco, as you outline in the book as well, in your book, in Uprooted, I think, right?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the Jews themselves deny their own history, and they say, the king always protected us, and they, in fact, there are instances where they suppress their own history. They don't want to make an issue of the past.
Absolutely. And that's, and when Lapid was going to Morocco, a week later, he actually created a diplomatic incident with Poland because the Polish government was denying the horrors or denying that they had any involvement in the Holocaust. They were saying that, they wanted to distance themselves from, they said it's only Germany. We were forced to do it. And he almost created a diplomatic crisis between Poland and Israel because of this statement. But in the same time, he would go to Morocco and just once again ignore the history of it's really sad to think about the abuse of the Mizrahi Jews.
But you also take a swipe against conservative Jews in America. Why is that? Can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, even while we are talking, I'm getting some messages from people saying that I shouldn't identify as Mizrahi. I think that that's why I'm the wrong kind of Jew, because I want to express myself how I want to and the way that I feel that is the most authentic for me. Some conservative Jews would tell me often that all Jews are Jews and we're all the same, and that I shouldn't speak about Mizrahi Jews as a different identity. And I'm a firm believer that you can always add identities. Of course, we are all Jews. Jews all have the same origin story. But we can add different layers to our identity. I can be a Jew and a man. I can be a Jewish gay man, a Jewish Mizrahi gay man, as others can be Jewish, women, or Jewish Ashkenazi women, Jewish Mizrahi women. We can always add identities, and I feel like that something that some conservative Jews, specifically in America, are denying because they are so afraid of or they reject the notion of identity politics, which I fully reject as well. I don't believe in identity politics. I think that it's terrible for progress. But I do think that there is a place for intersectionality and intersectional identities, and realizing that we all have different experiences doesn't mean that my experience is more important than others. And in the same thing, I think that in the same breath, I think they also are afraid of Mizrahi Jews being recognized as brown Jews or Jews of color, while Ashkenazi Jews would be considered as white, which I also reject. And I think we should be able to live in a reality where we accept several truths. That it is true that Mizrahi Jews are. I mean, I know when I get stopped in the airport and that they ask me about my name and they ask me where I'm from and they ask me about my accent, or the beard gets me, another hour or two in the JFK room on the side where my friends are going through. So I know that I get this specific treatment because of how I look or how I sound or my last name. And I think that some Jews that don't have this experience, it doesn't mean that their experience is less relevant or less important. I think it's both experiences are important, but it's just there's place to have a conversation about all of these issues. And yes, and even if you are, even if a Jew can pass as a white Christian, it doesn't mean that they would benefit from anything. I mean, we still live in societies where the dominated identity is Christian one, and we celebrate Christmas and Easter in those countries because those are Christian holidays. While there is separation of church and state, or in some countries, there's still no denying that Jews are a minority. That as we saw with the labor under Jeremy Corbyn, we are still at the mercy of the dominated society, and as they have done before, they might do it again and turn on us. So it doesn't matter if you're a Black Jew, Mizrahi Jew, or Ashkenazi Jew. All Jews are part of this. So just understanding this different identities and the intersection of different identities.
Yeah, you have a very nice sentence in the book. You say that memory is not a pool which can accommodate only so many swimmers. And I do like that. But isn't there a problem now with, we've just had a commission for diversity and inclusivity in the Jewish community in Britain. And actually, Mizrahi Jews were still invisible and still did not have a proper voice. It turned out that this commission was only interested in exploring discrimination against the very small minority of Black Jews who are obviously, you know, converts to Judaism, or, you know, of mixed race or something, and completely ignored the Mizrahi Jews. So, I mean, what do we do? It seems that this pool, you know, everyone can swim in it, but some people sink to the bottom and some float to the top.
Yeah, and I actually discussed that as well in the book, the part about how the Jewish community must use Mizrahi Jews as a key to access the conversation about intersectionality. The Arab and Muslim community in the West has done very well to discuss the bigotry that they're facing, to make Islamophobia an issue that people recognize and understand. My partner works in a luxury fashion shop in London, and he told me that during the diversity and inclusion training that they have, the person that came to discuss diversity and inclusion said, you know, every community experienced bigotry. The Black community faced racism, LGBTQ face homophobia, Black people face racism, Muslims face Islamophobia, and perhaps the only community that doesn't face any bigotry towards them is the Jewish community. That while they are a minority, they are still at the top and control, and they don't face bigotry. So, I mean, that was to me, my partner actually there are a few, he's not Jewish, hopefully he will convert one day, it's his decision, but there were other Jews in the session, and they haven't said anything, and he was waiting for them to speak up, and he was looking at them and they said nothing. Later on, he of course joined the diversity committee at his work, and is now changing the whole structure, and is including also a talk about anti-Semitism. But this sort of work, is amazing, honestly.
You have a great effect on him.
Yeah. But I think that this is what we need to do, and we need to we can't, there's approach, I feel, almost being defeated approach in the Jewish community, that we're saying, well, the progressive and the left has lost us completely, let's leave them, join the right wing, and you know, or some say that instead of trying to get a seat at the table, we just need to, you know, flip the table completely. I don't believe in this approach. I believe that we have to insert ourselves and make sure that we are heard, and keep on screaming until they hear us, and they will have to hear us eventually. And they do hear us. I do think that there is more openness and more by many voices to listen to our stories, to not only Mizrahim in general, Jews, and the idea of anti-Semitism. But I think it's up to us Jews to do that, and we can do it. And specifically, I think the story of Mizrahim as people of color, by the definition of what people of color means these days in modern day, we are able to be the ones that get the seat and then bring the Jewish experience into the conversation, just like Jimena did in California with the ethnic studies. They made sure that they would get a seat at a table as Jews as people from the Middle East and North Africa, and then they brought in the anti-Semitism and the Jewish experience, which, by the way, got them a lot of criticism and attacks by conservative Ashkenazi Jews. Instead of saying, this is wonderful, let's speak about anti-Semitism in this ethnic studies, they just wanted to completely, you know, attack. And that's the difference. For me, I care about the Jewish community. I don't care about politics. I have my politics, for sure. People know probably where I stand politically, but everything I do is meant for my people. First and foremost, I'm Jewish. That's the core of my identity. I'm a Jew, and I care about my people. And that's why I'm fighting. And I feel like when you're attacking ethnic studies in America because you're conservative and you hate ethnic studies in general, and you don't want Jews to be a part of it, then it means that you care about your politics before you care about Jews. And again, for me, it's Jews comes first.
But isn't it the whole framing of you know, ethnic studies, you know, identity politics, dividing people into white and color? Isn't that the problem? You know, that we have to work within this absurd frame, you know, and social constructs about power, who's powerful, who's not powerful, who's a victim, who's an oppressor. And, you know, isn't that the problem, that once you start working within that framework, you are actually legitimizing it?
I feel like, you know, we just had a conversation about how Mizrahi Jews are feeling that we're not seeing. And for us to say, well, you know, let's dismiss everyone else's experience, then we won't be able to speak about our experience either. I often find that when I have this conversation with my Jewish colleagues that that are more to the right, you know, they want anti-Semitism to be included, and they want people to recognize that Jews are not just a religious minority, or sometimes I even hear that they want Jews to be considered as a race, and that we face, or that we have been racialized and we face racism. So all of this conversation is a legitimate conversation to have, but we will only be able to have it once we are able to also say, you know, other minorities do face bigotry, and their experience is their experience, and we should listen to them, and we should act to solve that. I don't believe in separating or segregating people by identity. Again, I don't believe in identity politics. I think all those oppression Olympic, who suffers more and who has more, like, that's not the way. We need to fix society. We need to move forward together. And I think that for Jews, when we are fighting for people to recognize that anti-Semitism is real, when so many people don't recognize it, we must be able to also give space and listen and acknowledge that other minorities have their own experience. And perhaps, I mean, I would never understand what a Black person the experience of a Black person, because I'm not Black. But I can tell them about anti-Semitism and my experience. Not everything is about race. Not everything is about anti-Semitism. There's room for, as I say in the book, you know, it's there's a big pool. The pool is not limited. Like, we can all swim together in these conversations.
So, but intersectionality means supporting other minorities, isn't it? I mean, it's something that you are in favor of. But what happens, like, when Black anti-Semites, you know, commit violence against Jews, for instance? So obviously that's a section of the Black community that's doing that. So what would be your attitude towards that, you know?
The same attitude that I would hope the Black community would have to the Jewish community when we have people like Harvey Weinstein, or people like, you know, the Jeffrey Epstein. We have Jews that have committed horrific acts of violence and crimes and terrible. I mean, just we saw yesterday in Hawara, where a Palestinian city was all torched by Jewish people. So that we're not a monolith, the Jewish community. And that's what we're fighting for people to understand. You know, we're fighting a campaign of dehumanization. And the same way that I always do that, whenever I think about, you know, issue that I have with other community, I'm thinking, wait, how would I want people to react to something like this if it was the Jewish community? So in the same way, if a Black person commits act of hate crime against other minorities, we should call it out. If it's anti-Semitic, we should call it out. We shouldn't try to rationalize it or to excuse it in any way. And I've never, you know, and I also don't believe that there's, I heard this term, Black anti-Semitism or white anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. When people hate Jews, they hate Jews. It doesn't matter what flavor the hatred has. It's all the same for me. And I think we should call it out. And I think that we should also recognize that, you know, even if a white person hates Jews, it doesn't mean that all white people hate Jews. And if a Black person hates Jews, doesn't mean that all Black people hate Jews. And if there is a majority of white people in Europe or neo-Nazis in America that are all white, it doesn't make all white people anti-Semites. The same way that if there's a big section of the Black community that has prejudice against the Jewish community, doesn't mean that all Black people are sharing this opinion.
Okay. Well, that was an incredibly passionate and eloquent explanation. I'm very happy
I'd like to ask the first
question. I think Lawrence wants to ask a question. But can I just ask you to explain what the Tel Aviv Institute does?
Sure. So first of all, you can read more about it at tlvi.org, tlvi.org. We are a laboratory that trains social media influencers, Jewish ones, from different backgrounds to speak about their Jewish identity. We found that the best way to fight anti-Semitism is by Jews being proud in the streets, in our work, wherever we are. But the best way to promote Jewish pride is using social media influencers with millions of followers. We have 120 influencers in our network. We train them, we work with them, and then we create this network that we provide them the tools to speak up against anti-Semitism and about their Jewish identity.
Wonderful. I think Lawrence is the first question.
First
And if anyone has a question, please do type them in the chat, not just comments, but questions.
First thing, you have an invitation to come to us for Friday night when we're in Tel Aviv in April, and then guarantees you chopped liver, hummus, and curry.
Amazing. I love that.
Now, I noticed at the back of your book, which is it's available from Amazon if anyone wants it. I think it's about £15. I'll put a link in the chat. The publisher was called Wicked Sun. Could you explain?
How fitting, right?
Yeah.
It's a serious
well,
question.
I think it's great.
Oh.
Wicked Sun. Yeah.
Oh.
Was it your idea to call it the Wicked Sun?
No. It's a publisher. Sorry, it's it's Saul Bellow's son, Adam Bellow, started this publishing house for Jewish thought. So all the books are Jewish books, and it's called Wicked Sun because I think they promote Jewish ideas that do not often get to be heard.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and of course links back to the Passover, the 4 questions.
Yes.
So actually, I have to read at least one of the endorsements on your book. Which one shall I read? The one by Yossi Klein Halevi, perhaps?
Sure, yeah.
Who's a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute, for those who don't know. Hen Mazzig has emerged as one of the seminal voices of his generation, and this book explains why, writing with love for the Jewish people and his Mizrahi heritage, he takes on the anti-Zionists who seek to distort Mizrahi identity and fellow Jews who seek to erase it. Morally uncompromising, he passionately defends Israel even as he chastises it for its failures. Proud, fearless, eloquent, Hen Mazzig is precisely the right kind of Jew for our time, which I think says it all.
Yes, I was very grateful to. I mean, I remember reading Yossi Klein Halevi's books 10 years ago and thinking what a hero he is, and then getting this endorsement from him was really meant so much to me. So yeah.
Actually, I enjoyed his book too, but I did pick him up on the fact that he hardly mentions Mizrahim in it.
Yeah,
I noticed that too.
yeah. I mean, we've been absent from so much of the conversation, but I do see a change, and I think that the more we speak about it, I see more young Jews, young Mizrahim, adding Mizrahi to their bio or Sephardi to their bio, writing about it. It's becoming, as you said, it's becoming more cool and more popular, and I think it's beautiful, but it will take time.
Okay, so let's see what questions we've got. Hen, would you like to have a look at the chat and see if there are any questions which you feel you can answer or would like to answer?
Sure. Why do I use Mizrahi for Moroccan Jews? I use Mizrahi as a general term because Adota Mizrahi is for everyone from the Maghreb to the east, and that was from the north to the east. So Mizrahi is an umbrella term that was adopted in modern day Israel, but it's of course Adota Mizrahi is a term that existed much years before the existence of Israel.
Mm-hmm. And of course, yeah, we always get that because Morocco is to the west of most of Europe. So it should be Maravi rather than Mizrahi.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess it depends where's the center of the world. And for some people, it's Europe. If you ask the Chinese, they would say that, the land of the rising sun. The question is, where does the sun rise for and for whom?
Okay. Are there any more questions?
Kevin is keen to know why you use the word Mizrahi Jews.
Yeah, we just had that.
Oh, you have it.
We just had that. Yeah.
You create amplified division between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. I defend you in your work, but how would you respond to these claims that I amplify division between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim? I promise you, all I want is Ashkenazim to love me and to see us as one people. I love Ashkenazi Jews. It's if anything, I do not want this division. I promise you. like I think even in the book I wrote it. I wrote that when I was a kid, when they asked me what I want to be when I grow up, it was to be an Ashkenazi, because I thought that this is the best thing that a young Jew can be. So I promise you that I'm not the one that is, promoting the division. But as I said, there's still so many issues and imbalances between our communities, and Mizrahi Jews do not get to our identity, and our story is not being heard. So I'm trying to elevate it, and I think that by sharing my story, I'm not taking away from anyone's story. In the Tel Aviv Institute, we're working with Holocaust survivors. I'm personally working with a Holocaust survivor named Lucy Lipner. I run a Twitter account for her. We work on all of her stories together. I think it's such an important part. We need to do Holocaust awareness, but it seems like I'm able to fight for all Jews. But when I speak about Mizrahim, some Ashkenazim feel like I'm dividing us, or that but I promise it's not that. I just want to add. I don't want to take away from anyone else's story.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anything else? Got a lot of comments and lots of nice compliments.
Trying to see. Quick to look on Instagram, say that you say you should not knee-jerk reaction over what triggers you. What triggers me? What triggers me is sophisticated anti-Semitism. When people are trying to use, when professors and academics use language that I know that deep inside what they mean. So it's just, for me, it's very, that's what gets me really upset. So yeah, I guess and I spoke about that in the book as well. And there's another point that I want to speak about. Someone said that American Jews feel betrayed by Black people that are anti-Semitic, as many Jews were instrumental to the civil rights activism in the 60s and onwards. I definitely agree. We remember that. I mean, I agree with the part that some Jews, or Rabbi Heschel specifically, was part of the civil rights movement and marched down with Martin Luther King. But the question is, what have we been there enough since then? And, the reason that Black Lives Matter was added this whole part about Palestine in their agenda and became so anti-Israel was the only Jews that were in the room where Black Lives Matter wrote their agenda were a Jewish person that works for Adala, a Jewish person that is another anti-Zionist Jew, another person that works for Jewish Voice for Peace. The Jews that are working in the intersectional spaces, that are working with those minority communities, are often anti-Zionist. And I challenge our community to start being more vocal in intersectional spaces, in progressive movements. We can't just, we're still a minority. And to think that we can just give up half of the population in any country is just wrong. And I see it also with labor. I mean, we need to applaud Keir Starmer and his work, and we should be back there, because we can't just count on half of the country to like Jews and just dismiss the others. Even if there's anti-Semitism, there's left-wing anti-Semitism and there's right-wing anti-Semitism. As I said before, anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. And when people say they care more about specific part of anti-Semitism, what they really mean is that they don't really care about anti-Semitism, and they only want to use Jews when we are politically convenient for them. So yeah.
Yeah, but what if we're blocked from joining these groups? Like, I'm thinking of the LGBTQ women who were rejected from this demonstration. I think it was in Chicago, and they had Magen David on their flag. And so what happens when that when that happens?
Yeah, the march was called the Dyke March in Chicago.
Oh, that's right. Yes, thank you.
And there were several of my friends that are lesbian Jewish women that are Zionist, went to the march with Israeli flags, or flags with Star of David, and they actually fought to be included, and they did not let it go. And we still discuss it, which is really important for us, because although it happened a few years ago, we are still making it an issue, and that's really important. I think that's the way we can change realities, when we demand to be accepted, when we demand to have respect. Other minority communities, and I'm involved in so many causes, and in Black rights and trans rights, and I see all those communities, how they are fighting to be included in other places. The trans community is not included. For a long time, the gay community was against trans people, and they didn't want to accept them, and they fought to get a seat at the table. In the same way, I think the Jewish community need to fight to be. And once you demand this respect, people will respect you. Once you're not. Once you're not, other minority communities will not support people that are not able to stand up for themselves. So it's really important for Jews to be able to stand up for ourselves. And me and myself and many other young Jews are doing it. And I think it's important for all of us to do that as well.
Well, I think that sounds like the right note to end on. Hen, I know there's a question from Michelle about, is it an audio book? I'm not sure if your book is
I'm
available.
working on an audiobook these days. It will come out in a few weeks or so, but yeah, it's just recording, and I would say actually 2 months at least, because it takes time to record, and I need to go to the studio, so I'm doing it bit by bit. But yeah, in a few months there will be an audiobook as well.
Okay, that's great. So there you have it, The Wrong Kind of Jew, a Mizrahi manifesto. Go ye and buy it on Amazon or wherever. Thank you so much, Hen.
Thank you.
I'm going to save the comments for you on the chat, so you can have a look. Thank you so much, everybody, for commenting, for asking your questions, and for being here. And thank you once again, Hen, for joining us. It's been a fantastic conversation, and you're a passionate and inspiring advocate for all of us, I think.
Thank you so much, Lynn and Lawrence, and for everything.
Thank you to Lawrence for doing the tech. Without him, all this wouldn't be happening.
It would be.
Okay, just to give you a plug, give a plug to the next event. The next event will be on the 14th of March, when we have a remarkable woman called Catherine Perez Shakdan, who was actually married to a Muslim, but has reclaimed her Jewish identity and is an expert on Iranian politics. So come and hear her amazing story.
Right, now we're going to let everyone be able to unmute and have a quiet chat, which won't be recorded in about 2 minutes time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take out the meeting. People have called iPad, or we're not quite sure who they are.
This is your last chance to change your name.
Yeah.
From iPad. Yeah. Okay. And we've got the commercial break, haven't we?
That's going to come.
Yeah.
Right.
The advertisements. Lawrence will put on the advertisements. There are forthcoming talks.
Oh, it's interesting. One of the people who I was going to check has just removed themselves, which makes my life very easy.
Okay.
Okay, everyone can now unmute themselves, but please be disciplined.
Yeah.
And I will take the spotlights off as well. So Lynn, you're no longer spotlighted.
No, don't.
And Hen, you are no longer spotlighted. So everyone.
But please stay with us, because people might still want to ask you questions.
Actually, don't all go at once. Holly, you're first. You're always first.
I just want to thank you, Hen, for your wonderful talk. Lynn and Lawrence, as always, thank you. And Hen, you just go on and you just be any kind of Jewish person you want to be. That's the beauty of freedom.
Yeah.
Great. No one else wants to speak? No one else got a hand up, the electronic hand up?
I just want to say thank you, Hen. I've already put a comment, but
Yeah.
I just love you, so that's fine. And I like you. I don't often have a chance to listen to you, so that was quite a treat.
Thank you,
Thank you, Vivian. And you're also doing fantastic work yourself.
Yes.
I can't see anything.
Oh dear, can't see anything. Oh dear.
There
I can only see your lectures.
You just got the adverts now.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm sure you'll have a great time in Israel for Purim.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, we want pictures of you, Hen. Will you-
Yeah, I'll share them. No worries.
You and Mark in your costumes,
Yes, we'll share them.
and all the flabbergasted people looking at you, wondering what you.
Absolutely.
Hi, Hen. Thanks for your talk. I know you said you're not. I think you said you're not political. Is that right? Is that what you said? So you probably wouldn't want to answer my question. You know, what's your point of view about the occupation?
Well, I didn't say that I'm not political. I said that anti-Semitism is not political. I do have my political opinions, and I try to. I mean, we try to not get into it too much, but I do support a two-state solution. And I think that if we are, you know, and as people, as Zionism is about national rights for